Hi, everyone, and welcome to Bleav in Big Ten from State of State, a Penn State football show, and, of course, this show, Bleav in Big Ten. I'm Tom Hannifan. He is former Indiana Hoosiers wide receiver Rhett Lewis, representing both the Big Ten and NFL networks. Once again, we're talking about the coaching carousel. Once again, we're talking about the reigning national champions, the Ohio State Buckeyes. So they figured out their offensive coordinator spot, and it looks like they might have their defensive coordinator spot figured out. What does this mean for Ryan Day and the way that he's steered this program in the right direction, saving his job from the jaws of firing and defeat, all those sorts of things, and really turn things around in Columbus for his own fortunes, and now kind of calling his shot as the head of the Buckeyes. So we're going to dive into all that here on Bleav in Big Ten. This podcast is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from the NBA to college basketball to the NHL and UFC. BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. Bleav in Big Ten is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. Rhett, let's first start with the offensive coordinator job being filled from within by Ohio State. A lot of speculation. Would they go outside the program after Chip Kelly was grabbed by the Las Vegas Raiders of the NFL? And instead, it was the longtime wide receivers coach, arguably the best wide receiver coach in America, Brian Hartline, who gets elevated to be the offensive coordinator for Ohio State. What did you think of that move by Ryan Day?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for familiarity, and there's also something to be said for career arc. And this is a logical next step for Brian Hartline, who a couple of years ago was kind of in this role in a pseudo kind of fashion. I think there was still some ambiguity as to how the play calling was going over that time. Ultimately, they moved past that and now are back to it. And maybe that experience, as being in a coordinator level position a couple of years ago, can be beneficial for Brian Hartline. But I think what this does here is this kind of locks the gate a little bit in terms of, all right, we've got somebody that Jeremiah Smith, we've got somebody that a lot of our offensive linemen are familiar with. Obviously, we keep our receiver pipeline rolling. We keep our recruiting pipeline rolling. And now Hartline has had an opportunity to be around a bunch of guys who have been really good at game planning. Go back to, Kevin Wilson, Justin Fry is a part of that group as the offensive line, helping out with the run game and pass protection. Kevin Wilson was the offensive coordinator for a couple of years before leaving for Tulsa when they hired Chip Kelly, who came in and did a phenomenal job this year running the Buckeyes offense. And then Ryan Day, obviously at the top of it, is one of the best offensive minds in this game. So I think what you've given here is a great gumbo pot of influence for Brian Hartline to pick and choose from, whether that's scheme related, whether that's communication related, whether that's motivation based, whether that's how you want to work on the game plan from a week, day to day, basis throughout the week. I think there's just so much good experience that has come with being on this staff for Hartline that he's going to be in a real position to succeed. Now, the question comes now. Let's also make mention of the fact that Keenan Bailey has been promoted to co-offensive coordinator, has been the tight ends coach. So again, you've got some familiarity elevating into those offensive coordinator level positions here. And I think what you're doing here is I don't imagine that this offense is going to look a whole lot different this year than it did a year ago.
No.
Now, surely you're going to have some differences in the way it's called. You're going to have, probably some different emphasis, some different wrinkles, as there is every year, even if there wasn't a change. But I think ultimately the messaging is going to remain largely the same. And for a national championship, the defending national champion, that's what you want. You don't want to do this thing a whole lot differently than you did a year ago. And I think that's ultimately what Brian Hartline brings here.
Do you think Brian Hartline's the offensive coordinator in execution or in title?
Both. I do think Ryan Day saw how beneficial it was for him to be in a CEO type of role.
Yeah.
A hands-on CEO type of role for sure. but one that can manage, from 300 feet, but also from 3,000 and 30,000 feet, because that's what it takes in today's college football. You are not only the head coach of this football team, like you are the team president. You are in some way, shape, or form, the buck stops with you when it comes to personnel. Even if you give somebody else the general manager title, like you've got all these buckets that you have to be filling as the head coach. That, oh, by the way, like you've got this huge one over here. If that's your responsibility to be game planning, play calling, and da da da. Now, what we have seen on the NFL level in a lot of different places, I think about it with the Rams, I think about it most notably recently with the Dallas Cowboys, is you have an offensive coordinator who puts the game plan together all week, and then you have a head coach who calls the plays. Now, that's obviously worked very well in Los Angeles for the Rams. It did not work as well for the Dallas Cowboys with Mike McCarthy, who is now no longer the head coach, but the guy who was putting those game plans together all week long is now the head coach in Brian Schottenheimer. So I think this is a Hartline calling the plays situation. I don't think you're gonna go back to where they were a couple of years ago, where Ryan Day was trying to do everything. I think in today's world, that's just too much in college football. So ultimately, to answer your question, I think he's everything that you want and need an offensive coordinator to be.
We'll get to more of Ryan Day's job now and how he was micromanaging during the 2024 season. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, but obviously it led them to a national championship. So all's well that ends well, basically. But Ryan Day's influence now, especially in the defensive coordinator search. But staying with Brian Hartline, there's a lot that he's going to have to deal with here in 2025. Now, granted, you're losing Emeka Egbuka from this wide receiver corps. You keep Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. You lose Will Howard. You lose both your running backs. You lose Justin Simmons, who it was lost earlier on in the year, but still a lot of turnover. So there's going to be that issue for Hartline. And I think especially biggest question mark is who's playing quarterback. There's a lot of indications that Julian Sayin, the transfer from Alabama, who was a 5-star recruit, is the guy and is going to be the guy. It's just a matter of, hey, what happens in the next 7 months and who kind of winds up taking the job. Julian Sayin jumping in as the first-year starter under a first-year offensive coordinator after a national championship could spell trouble. It could take Ohio State a minute to get themselves going. The positive is that you retain Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, so you can lean on those guys, and you feel pretty comfortable about the offensive line talent you have coming back. So if you're in Brian Hartline's shoes, how big of a task is that breaking in a new quarterback in year one as the OC?
I think it's going to be very challenging. I think any year in today's college football world that you are breaking in an unknown commodity to your program, it is going to be challenging. Now, he's had the benefit of being with the program for a year. This is not a true freshman starting like you might have up in Michigan.
Right.
Excuse me. If we're talking about Ohio State, can we still say the team up north, whatever you want to call them, with Bryce Underwood? I think there was a lot of talk, about that in Nebraska with Dylan Raiola and what he's, been able to do as a true freshman. It's different now. Like, it's different for Julian Sayin, who has been in the program, has seen how things are run, has been around the guys. And, I imagine in some way, shape, or form, there were times throughout this year where, he did things where other guys took notice and was like, I could see us playing with, like, for this guy like this, and I hope that is the case, because that'll make the transition a lot easier in the spring if he is the guy that gets the nod. And I do expect he will be, barring something unforeseen. So it's a challenge, but I think, you also look at the layers, the staff layers here in terms of the voices that are going to be in it. I think you look at a Ohio State coaching staff that is deep in terms of analysts, in terms of coaching assistants, in terms of guys who are helping out the quarterback position on this staff. I think of a guy like Billy Fessler, who was with the Buckeyes last year, worked closely with Chip Kelly and the quarterbacks, could get an elevation. I don't think Brian Hartline is going to sit in the quarterback meetings, and coach the quarterbacks that way. Now, is he going to have some influence? Are you maybe going to see some crossover and you'll see the quarterbacks and receivers meeting together? I think all that stuff is, if that happens, is potentially beneficial. I think having an offensive coordinator, that does have tentacles in other facets of the offense can also be valuable as well. And then Ryan Day himself is a quarterback whisperer. So like you've got these levels that can help bring about development in a quarterback. And look, let's look at it this way too. Let's look at what Will Howard did here. I remember, I've said it here on this show. He talked to me this summer. He's like, man, I'm so excited to be coached by Ryan Day, to be coached by Chip Kelly, to be coached, and kind of went on and on. And so I'm like, this makes a lot of sense here when you look at the development piece of this, because Will Howard, when he stepped foot in Columbus, he has become a completely different player by the end of it. And that is as a result of coaching, and that is as a result of development. And certainly Ryan Day had a hand in that. And so I think you could see the very same thing here, even though Chip Kelly is gone. I think the quarterback development piece still exists within this program. And I would imagine that there's going to be some hiccups and some bumps in the road for sure. But on the whole, I would imagine if it's Julian saying that, we'll be saying this was a fairly smooth transition moving forward.
I see what you did there. That was nice. With Brian Hartline as the offensive coordinator, for however long this lasts, it undoubtedly makes Ohio State wide receiver U. Period. In my opinion, there is no more argument. LSU can't necessarily weigh into this. I understand the production that both schools have had in terms of putting guys in the NFL. Arguably the best wide receiver coach in America is now the offensive coordinator. It's the most wide receiver friendly system in the country, and it's the best program in the country. It's the reigning national champions. So as long as Brian Hartline is in that role, whether he is actually calling the plays or not, if he is that entitled, or as long as he has that level of responsibility and that level of a role to represent the university, to represent the football team, my God, is it going to be easier and easier and easier for Ohio State to go and get more Jeremiah Smiths. And that should be terrifying to everybody in the Big Ten and beyond. So I'm very excited to see what Hartline can do. As a Penn State fan, I'm terrified about it, but I'm very excited for Brian Hartline. On the flip side of the ball, this is where things will start to get interesting with Ryan Day. So Jim Knowles gets grabbed by Ohio State. Obviously, a bit of a rocky divorce.
Penn State,
right. Excuse me. Penn State grabs Jim Knowles. Excuse me. Too many states. Penn State grabs Jim Knowles from Ohio State. Jim Knowles, who was at Oklahoma State, then Ohio State, then Penn State. Say that 5 times fast. Okay, there's that. Jim Knowles is out. So who do you get as your defensive coordinator? There are rumors that Ohio State is looking to grab Matt Patricia. Who was a longtime defensive coordinator for the New England Patriots during their dynastic run under Bill Belichick with Tom Brady, was at one point the head coach of the Detroit Lions. That didn't go great, was a defensive coordinator for the now reigning Super Bowl champions Philadelphia Eagles, not this season, but in the past. That didn't go great. You know what this reminded me of? Is I remember when Nick Saban was the head coach at Alabama, and there would be these reclamation projects he would have on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. He'd get this coach that everybody knew had talent, but it just hadn't worked out someplace else, whether it had been in the pros or the college ranks. And he brings them in for a year, maybe two, rehabilitates their image, and they go off into the wilderness and they make themselves a grand future. I don't know if this is actually going to materialize, but at first glance, what do you think about Matt Patricia potentially being the defensive coordinator for the Ohio State Buckeyes?
Okay, let's before I get to that, let's go back, because this has been, kind of a journey, right? Yeah. And you touched on it with the rocky road that led from the national championship game in Atlanta to the Ohio State, national championship celebration, of which Jim Knowles wasn't a part. And then he goes and he takes the same position at Penn State, although at a higher salary. And then there was like, okay, who's next, right? There's a lot of talk about Randy Bates at a time, defensive coordinator at Pitt, that maybe he might be, someone that Ryan Day was targeting. That kind of fizzled. And then there was, some talk about the internal candidates, and I'll get to that here in just a minute as well. But then the reports kind of shifted down south, whereas, there were reports that Ryan Day was offering the job to DJ Durkin, a Big Ten veteran, remember, was the head coach at Maryland. Obviously did not work out there for a variety of reasons, but has been a really good defensive coordinator since then. And he's been down with Auburn and Hugh Freeze. And so there was talk that Ryan Day made an offer, but DJ Durkin is staying at Auburn because Hugh Freeze was not going to let that happen, upped his salary at Auburn to stay. And so then now we're seeing a report about Matt Patricia. A couple of different outlets have made this report out there. I don't know if I'm ready to Bleav yet, I think is my point, because we've kind of gone down this road a couple of different times already. But we can talk about the prospect of it for sure. So you detailed Matt Patricia's history here. I think that there is a lot of what he has done in his career that would be very appealing. I think you look at the times during, whether it was that 16, 17, 18 run where the Patriots were trying to go for three-peat, but they had won back-to-back. I mean, they were in the AFC Championship game and in the Super Bowl seemingly every year. And he was such a big piece of that. Now, ultimately, it's Bill Belichick's defense, right? And he is the steward of that defense as the defensive coordinator, but he picks up a lot of stuff there, right? He's a sponge. He is a really flipping smart dude too. If you look back at his, collegiate education, I was like rocket scientist or something, and I mean, like really, really smart guy. So like he's got a lot of that cerebralness that you would want from a defensive coordinator to kind of understand the way that an offense wants to attack. He wants to understand the way that his defense can then, deal with that and then flip that attack back onto the offense. So I think there are multiple, the way that, he has run defense when he has been the defensive coordinator. They have multiple looks, multiple fronts, multiple coverages from the back end. They're doing a lot of different things to take away, to make an offense left-handed. Like there is a lot to like about the idea of Matt Patricia, the defensive coordinator. I think you look at his experience in the NFL, and we're seeing all these guys from the NFL now come to the college game, right? We're seeing it like Ron Rivera during Super Bowl week is now going back to Cal to help run personnel there. I think, again, having another NFL piece there, if it is Matt Patricia, could be beneficial. The way that the professional model works, which we are certainly moving towards and are virtually there in college football. I think there's, a voice there that could be useful and valuable in those discussions. But then you look at the last couple of years and you're like, well, has the shine wore off? Has the luster come off of all of these things that we're talking about that are appealing about Matt Patricia? Like what there is left? Has the year off rekindled that fire in him, that creativity, that that want and desire, to be back leading a defense and standing in front of a room? I think there's more to like than there is to dislike, ultimately, if this Patricia thing does happen. But I would also say that there are some really good internal candidates there, similar to the way that you went out and promoted Brian Hartline. Matt Guerrieri is the safeties coach at Ohio State. The safeties on Ohio State's defense, while immensely talented, were phenomenally productive this year. Caleb Downs, arguably the best one in college football. Lathan Ransom, not that far behind. I got to know Matt Guerrieri. I got to see him in staff meetings. I got to hear the way he communicates. The wheels turning in his brain turn way faster than they do in mine. Okay, and I can appreciate that. It is a sharp dude. And Ryan Day has said himself that this dude is a rising star in college football and one of the brightest minds in college football. Again, he's been around the program. He left. He was around he was with the program in 22 after leaving Duke. Then went to Indiana to become the defensive coordinator. And then after Tom Allen got fired and that staff got wiped out, went back to Ohio State and became the safeties coach. He's been around this Ohio State program now. And again, kind of the same things with Brian Hartline. Like I think can find some benefit in continuity here. Like he can take a lot of that Jim Knowles stuff that really worked well and continue to implement it here. He can put his twist on it. He can find ways to keep it fresh. So I'm kind of pulling for that move here because I think, again, we had this conversation when Chip Kelly first left. Ryan Day's, one of his biggest jobs is coaching the staff. And you've got to have those next guys ready to go because if you were going to be competing for national championships every year, you were going to be losing coordinators every year. That is the nature of this business. And so you've got to have that pipeline ready to go. And while it's great to get the celebrity coordinator, it's also good to know and to feel comfortable with the guys that you have on your staff. And so I think the case to be made for Matt Guerrieri is a strong one there, as a guy who's called defenses before, who's called defensive plays, and would be, I think, a really good fit to kind of continue this run of dominance for Ohio State's defense.
But you raise a fair point. Patricia's best years were under Bill Belichick, and Bill Belichick was running that defense.
Yeah.
People know that. Is Matt Patricia the Josh McDaniels of defensive coordinators, that outside of Foxborough, that magic doesn't?
Or the Eric Mangini. We've seen this before with folks. I mean, look, Brian Flores now has had some real success as a coordinator outside of Bill Belichick's window. Maybe not as much as the head coach, but man, his run as the Vikings D coordinator, helping out with the Steelers. So, I mean, let's just not blanket it, with, all right, is another Belichick thing gone wrong, but it is fair to wonder and to bring that up as a question.
And now Ryan Day, I mentioned this before. I want to be clear. I am not comparing Ryan Day to Nick Saban. However,
you're not?
No. However, what he's built now in Columbus, I talked about it being kind of this reclamation project for coordinators, and that Chip Kelly, he kind of a similar path to Matt Patricia, and that obviously great years in the college ranks, did some amazing things at Oregon, went all the way to a national championship. Then he gets into the NFL and he pisses off every player imaginable in Philadelphia, goes to San Francisco, struggles there, and then all of a sudden he's at UCLA, and people are like, why is he at UCLA? And it was coming out that he just didn't want to do the recruiting stuff. He just wanted to coach ball. So he goes to be a coordinator at Ohio State. That's what that is now in the NIL era, is that if you're a coordinator, it's not that you're exempt from recruiting. You just really don't have to do much in it. That's on other people. If you go out and you shake a few hands, it's fine. But they're like, we just want you to coach this side of the ball. So maybe that's the attraction for Matt Patricia, and it's a chance for him to rehabilitate his image to potentially go back to the NFL. But you get to do it at the biggest program in college football. It makes a lot of sense. And I wonder, from your observations on both sides, college and the NFL, what's gone wrong for Matt Patricia in these last handful of stops?
Well, here's the thing that has gone wrong. If you want to kind of find the congruencies in others who have branched out from Bill Belichick and had trouble finding success at the highest level, bring up Josh McDaniels. I brought up Eric Mangini, Romeo Crennel, even, while he's been a successful coordinator, maybe not as much as a head coach in Cleveland or as the interim head coach in Houston. But I think Belichick is such a dominant, I don't say personality, but figure, right?
He looms large. He looms large.
Looms very large. He's a guy that has, I don't want to say intimidating, but it can be intimidating. He's got great knowledge. He's obviously won at the highest level for a very long time. And I think there's like, okay, I'm going to take what I've learned here and I'm going to do that at this next spot. And I think a lot of the common threads through the failures have been, all right, it's just trying to make, the Denver Broncos the New England Patriots, or make the Detroit Lions the New England Patriots, bring in a lot of the same folks that have the same line of thinking. I think challenging some of that in your own way is what is healthy. And I'm not in that building, so I can't tell you whether that was the case. I think you can point to a lot of different things that have transpired, in the years that Matt Patricia was in Detroit, and say that maybe that was something there. But now he's been out for a year. He didn't get the DC job at Carolina with Bill Belichick. His son, Steve, did. Yeah. So I think this is a real opportunity to redefine himself. And I think that would be really cool. And maybe he could parlay that into what Belichick's doing now. And maybe he's like, this college head coaching thing is maybe something that's more for me. So I think it'd be cool for Matt Patricia. I think there are positives to it from Ohio State. I'm just not so sure we're going to see it happen.
Bill O'Brien is kind of an outlier, and that leaving New England, going to Penn State for one season, got to see how he really improved the stock of that program that was on life support.
Yeah.
Goes to the Houston Texans, probably got too much responsibility.
Ups and downs, and there was a lot of stuff there. Yeah.
And then went to Alabama, ironically, as we were just talking about, was one of the many Nick Saban reclamation projects, and then was about to be, ironically, also the offensive coordinator for Ohio State.
Right.
And then in the middle of the night, it's like, I'm going to go be the head coach at Boston College. And he had obviously spent so much time in Boston, in the Massachusetts area. So that makes a ton of sense. It's just fascinating what coaching has gotten to at this point in time, is that at the NFL level, they're obviously expecting tremendous production. The leash is so short, but they're just saying, coach ball. But when you go to the college level, you do have to hit the trail a little bit and do some recruiting. You see what Colorado's attempting to do with, well, let's get as many guys with gold jackets in here. So they just do the advertising for us.
Yeah.
Matt Patricia will potentially, get some more eyeballs in that respect. But I think Hartline's going to do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of the recruiting side of things. So it seems like Ohio State's set up well for next year.
I think so.
It's just a big question mark of 2025, who in the Big Ten is going to be able to challenge them. Penn State, it feels like, yes, but Oregon, you mentioned Michigan casually, but like Bryce Underwood, is that lightning in a bottle year one?
Yeah. And I think, let's not leave out, the other team from the Big Ten that was in the college football playoff, and my Indiana Hoosiers, who have, retooled their roster in a very positive way and have a lot of coordinator consistency there, despite overtures from schools like Penn State and others. So look, I think there's a lot to like about the competition level and the elite level of contention there for national title within those top tier teams in the Big Ten.
Stay locked in here with us on Bleav in Big Ten, because it's that time of year. The Super Bowl is over. The national championship is over. We're getting ready for the recruiting season to really ramp up. Everybody's getting ready for winter workouts and spring ball at the college level. The NFL draft is right around the corner. So which Big Ten players should you be watching for to make a splash in the 2025 NFL draft? We're going to have all that here on Bleav in Big Ten.